Hey everyone, Tom Schwab here from Interview Valet, and welcome to another episode of the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that is close to my heart and crucial for your business growth. It's about turning every podcast interview into a strategic asset. You know, more isn't better, better is better. And in this conversation with Chloe, one of our senior account managers, we're going to explore exactly how you can make sure every podcast interview you do fuels your brand, fuels your authority, and yes, fuels your revenue. Chloe shares how to move beyond just showing up and actually leveraging each appearance to amplify your voice and connect with your ideal audience. We'll talk about practical strategies for repurposing your content, nurturing engagement long after the episode airs, and using the power of podcast interviews to create marketing campaigns. Heck, even entire books from your existing conversations. Chloe's insights, they're going to inspire you to stop seeing podcasts just as a one and done event and start seeing it for what it is, a dynamic, evergreen resource for your business. So grab a pen and start taking notes. This episode is going to change your approach how you do podcast interviews forever. One of the things that we talk about with our clients and internally is just don't do more interviews. Get more from your interviews, right? More is not better. Better is better. And we're not optimizing for more activity. We're optimizing for more results. And I'm so excited to talk with Chloe today. She's one of our senior client account managers, and she lives this, she preaches this, and she understands this so well. So Chloe, welcome.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this. I feel very, very strongly about it, and it's good to get a chance to say it.
Yes. And I love one of your phrases that repurposing is a strategy, not an afterthought, right? And, you know, you say that, and I think people just take it as a phrase, but can you explain that, what you mean by that? Because what's ordinary to you is amazing to others.
Absolutely. So it's just like you said, it needs to be a strategy. And I feel like most people don't take that as seriously as they need to when they first hear it. One of the things that you and I and everyone we work with in the industry is always trying to make it a point through to people that podcast guesting is not the same as podcast interview marketing. And if you're only looking to do podcast guesting, then, you know, by all means, let repurposing be an afterthought that you just kind of scramble together when the episode goes live. But if you're actually trying to get results, you're trying to get that engagement, you're trying to set yourself apart as the thought leader that we believe you can be, it needs to be a plan, it needs to be intentional, and it needs to be strategic. And I mean, I can tell you from experience, every once in a while, you will have a host that gives you a very detailed idea of when the episode is going live. So your strategy can follow according to that. More often than not, though, the host will just randomly send you an email one day, 3 months after you recorded, and say, okay, it's live. And then if you haven't had a strategy in place, what are you going to do? You're going to scramble to make a post that doesn't have the points you want to make. If you even remember, sometimes it may be 5 days later, you remember, oh yeah, that went live. I should maybe do something with that. And then you've already lost 5 days of potential engagement. So you have to go into it strategically, or you're leaving money on the table. I hate to use such an outdated phrase, but that's what you're doing.
Well, yeah. And you're leaving money on the table, gold, right? You've got this great content that you could do so much with. And so many times people are just reactive, or it's just like, well, I'm going to go on to the next interview. And I think it's interesting. You said strategy, right? If you're reacting to something, that's not strategic. And, you know, so if all of a sudden the podcast comes out and it's like, oh, I should make a post about this, or, you know, just making it up as you go, you're not going to get the great results with it. And, you know, I would even push back that there are times where I'll ask the host afterwards, hey, this interview was so great. Can I get a copy early so me and my team can start working on this, because we want to promote this when it goes live? Because sometimes we can be more strategic, proactive. And guess what? If they know that we at Interview Valet are promoting it too, it seems to go to the front of the line. So it helps in so many different ways there.
Exactly. And I mean, hosts are just like anybody you would work with in your day-to-day business. If you don't show that you're interested in working with them, why would they be interested in working with you? And I don't know, anybody can just get in front of a microphone and talk for 45 minutes and then wait, sit back and wait for the fame and the engagement and the notoriety to hit them. But like, if that were the case, we'd all be famous, wouldn't we? And that's not how it's supposed to work. You have to actually put in the work and the strategy to get what you want out of it. It's what you make it get.
Well, let's talk about somebody that doesn't talk for 45 minutes, but talks for 3 hours and is incredibly famous, right? Joe Rogan. I remember during the election, every newspaper out there, media source was saying he gets heard by 100 million people. And I'm like, there is no way that 1 in 3 adults in the US is listening to a 3-hour podcast. So, we license lots of databases. I looked it up there. Joe Rogan gets 2.2 million downloads per episode, makes him the #1 podcast. Now, the media is not lying that he gets heard by 100 million. What it is, though, those other 98 million are hearing him in the shorts, right? So they listen to 60 seconds here, 90 seconds there. They hear him, they know him, they recognize him. But even Joe Rogan is getting the vast majority, 98% of his listens through this repurposed content. And guess what? If it works for him, it'll work for other people.
Definitely. And, I've said this on podcasts before. It's not a secret. As a collective, human beings, our attention spans are dwindling. They're not where they used to be. So we can fight against it. And I think we should. I do think it's up to us to kind of bring that collective attention span back to the long form content. Obviously, I work in podcasting. I wouldn't just say that. That's how I feel. But we can kind of play into it too. If you're utilizing the fact that people have short attention spans, well, that's what repurposing is for. That's how you kind of get that interest right off the bat. And then you can direct them to the longer form content. But if all you're doing is just dropping the podcast link with no context, no excitement, no anything, why would anybody click on that? You have to have a plan behind that, or you're just talking into the void. And that's exactly what everyone's trying to avoid.
Yes. So let's talk more about awareness, because there's different areas of awareness, right? Of when you want to reach people. So how can you use that content for awareness to meet people where they are?
I think awareness is a perfect word, and I think that could be your very first step. So I think there are a lot of different methods for repurposing. The default thought is like a short clip. That's typically what people say, but you can go even a little more stripped down than that. A static quote image, just one sentence that you said during the podcast, that could paste that on a nice looking image, post that. That'll kind of drum up the awareness. That gets people talking. That gets people excited to hear what's next. Then I think maybe a little bit after you've posted that, you could start looking into things like reels, interview clips. That way you kind of drum up a little bit more excitement. That's kind of getting people to consider listening to it. That's that consideration you want, because, okay, I saw the quote that got my attention. Now I'm hearing you speak in like a broader context, and perhaps that excites people to then go ahead and listen to the full thing. And I do think there is benefit to posting the full thing. I know I kind of just made a joke about it, that like you can't just post it and walk away from it. Still use it, but I do think you kind of have to place those breadcrumbs, so to speak, with like static images and reels to get that awareness and then that consideration. And then after that, that's when you can post the full thing. And then you can kind of expand on what you talk about, make a long form post, especially places like LinkedIn. I find that the posts that typically do the best are the longer ones. So use that to your advantage, and you can always post it in there. And then that's where people can then make their decision. Okay, now I'm going to listen to this full 45-minute podcast because they've gotten me so intrigued with everything that they've posted so far. So I do think, again, this is that strategy. There's a really good benefit to kind of segmenting what you're doing and kind of put it in a tier rating so that you can keep people interested without just putting it all out there and expecting everything to happen for you. You have to keep them waiting. You got to leave a little to the imagination. I hate to use that phrase, but that is kind of what you're doing here. You're kind of giving them an idea of what you're going to talk about so that they're excited to hear the longer form of it to get to that meat of what you're actually trying to say.
And I love podcasts because it allows us to create in the way that we find easiest and repurpose it into the ways other people do, right? So not everybody listens to the clips or the videos, right? Some of them will read the text. Some of them will read just the captions there. So you got to have those there. Some of them are in a place where they don't have time to do that, but boy, you can catch them with that quote or that as seen on, right? It used to be as seen on TV. Now it's like, wow, they were on this podcast. That almost gets more authority there.
Exactly. I would say if you're going to be doing clips, kind of be selective about what you're going to put in there. I think a 45 straight clip of you just talking is a great place to start. But sometimes here's a little free tip for everybody. Sometimes you could also include a host question and then set it up for your clip, because that's also giving a little extra attention to the host there. If their face is in your clip, you're going to make their day too, because now they're also getting the views. That's that Joe Rogan effect. Okay. He's like Tom said, he's not getting all these views just from the 3-hour interview. It's also those little clips. And you can use that to your advantage too. You can be Joe Rogan, maybe not the man himself, but you can take some pages out of the book. He's putting it out there for you to see.
It's interesting. There's talk now that AI is looking at eyeballs, right? So if it's just me talking, it doesn't index as well. But if it's Chloe also, you don't even have to tag her. They're going to facial recognition, whatever, and realize, oh, it's Chloe Williamson, right? So we're going to promote that to all of her audience there too. So, just the spotlight doesn't have to be on me all the time. And you mentioned where you are. It seems like the vast majority of our clients are on TikTok, right? There's other ones too. If you're health and wellness, if you're younger, it can be Instagram. There's places for other ones, but boy, for professional services, for B2B, it seems like LinkedIn is the place where people are going.
Absolutely. And I think LinkedIn is a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful platform. Like I said, it's one of the last remaining social media platforms where long form posts tend to trend better than the shorter form ones. And I think you should use that to your advantage. I also think, I don't want to say since the dawn of social media marketing, that's predating myself, but for many years, I would say at least 10 years, this fact has remained. There are peak posting times. They haven't changed. They're still the same. I think you can use that to your advantage, especially on places like LinkedIn. And if you don't know, dear listeners, here you go. Run away with this tip too. Your best bet for posting on LinkedIn is going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I would avoid Fridays because on Fridays, everybody's checked out, getting ready for the weekend. And I would avoid Mondays because on Mondays, everyone is catching up from what they checked out on from Fridays. So give those days a little bit of a rest. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I would say mid-morning. Don't post it as soon as you wake up. As soon as you get to work, it's just going to get buried from other posts that come in after you. Mid-morning, that would be probably 10 a.m. local time, I would say is usually your best bet. That's when you can kind of get the best engagement, even if it's a multi-paragraph post. By lunchtime, people have time to read that. They're going to be getting on their phones and checking LinkedIn, and they're going to have time to read that. And that's where they can say, oh, wow, that sounds so interesting. I'm going to bookmark this page and I'm going to make sure to listen to this podcast later when I get off of work. And then you have people excited about it all day long because you took the time to make that post and use that engagement to your advantage.
I would also say LinkedIn loves engagement, right? So engaging is both ways. So even if you schedule that post, make sure that it's during a time where you can engage, right? So if you're going to post that at 11 a.m., your time, East Coast time, make sure you've got at least some windows there to go back and thank people, to answer their question, engage it. That first hour is so vital to get that engagement. And, here behind the curtain, right? One of the things that we do at Interview Valet is share the social media love, right? If there's something from one of our clients, the team, anything like that, we'll share that link. And people are normally working. They see it. They start to engage it. And you can get a lot of traction. You can tell what a post is going to do long term in that first hour or two.
Mm-hmm. And hey, you never know what kind of questions people are going to ask in your comments because, again, it's an open engagement platform. LinkedIn is for people who are trying to connect with one another, rather something like Facebook where you're really just trying to make yourself look good. I know that wasn't the intention of that platform at first, but that's what it's become. And LinkedIn hasn't really fallen to that. LinkedIn is still a place where we're trying to connect and engage and make new leads there. So people tend to ask a lot of questions in comments on LinkedIn. It's a very common trend. You'll see it everywhere. Answer the question or direct them to the interview. You could even say, that's a great question. Here's a short answer. If you want a bigger answer, make sure to check out the interview because I go over this. Every bit of engagement, every comment, everything on LinkedIn is just another opportunity to drum up more excitement for what you're doing. And to not utilize that is, again, leaving your gold on the table. You should really use it to your advantage.
We were talking the other day in one of our team meetings. You were sharing the story of using interviews as lead magnets. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Everybody's thinking about cutting it up and putting it on social media, but there's so many other places that you can use it also.
Again, I get to talk about long form content. How excited am I? So this is something I tell any client I work with, especially those who are newer to podcast guesting, who don't really understand what they're doing and don't have an idea of the strategy. There is so much power in your words. And, sometimes we get clients who are happy to talk about themselves. They love doing it. They have no problem doing it. More often than not, we get clients who are not as keen on that, and they tend to need the kind of encouragement. And I don't think the average person, even the not average person, the extraordinary person, because they're extraordinary to us, right? I think even an extraordinary person doesn't realize the power that their words have. And what I mean by that is that one single sentence that you say in an interview could open up a world of possibility in terms of your strategy and your marketing. One single sentence could become an entire blog post. It could become a downloadable resource. That's something you like to utilize a lot, that we see a lot of benefit from. Your downloadable PDFs. It's, 5 things that I can take away from this interview, and then you offer it to people, and then it's an extra resource for them. So even if they're not listening to the interview, which, of course, that's what we hope for, but that's not what everyone does. Like we said, sometimes the repurposing is their only access to it. But if they have context to what you're talking about in the form of a PDF or a blog post or a downloadable something, that's valuable information that they're getting, and they feel like they're getting kind of like an exclusive thing, even if it's available to everyone on the website, because they have the context of where it's coming from. And that could turn into something, it can turn into an entire marketing campaign. As long as you say something punchy enough and you have the context to back it up, that's a really powerful tool.
Yeah. And it's this whole idea of creating from a blank page or blank screen is tough. It's like, well, what do I write about? What do I do for my lead magnet, my newsletter, whatever it is? And it's like, you've already done it, right? All of those things that you've talked about and done it. You can take that, repurpose those ideas. And I've heard some people say, well, it seems like cheating, right? It's already out there. People have already heard it. Well, guarantee you, everyone has not memorized your last 3 podcast interviews. And they're like, oh, I've got to start something new. Well, look at the best authors out there. There are people that have built careers off of one book that are basically repurposing content from that. I'll point out Christianity, right? Christianity is 2,000 years of repurposed content. And that's great, right? There's new insights, new applications and everything like that. So don't feel like you've got to start something new from the very beginning, right? When you go see somebody perform, when you see your favorite band perform, they're not always starting something new. If they did, you wouldn't hear them. You want the repurposed content.
I mean, how many times have you rewatched your favorite series? Everybody's at least 5 times at that point. People, there's comfort in things you've already done. And just because you've already done it doesn't mean you can't spin it on its head even slightly and keep that engagement going. Exactly.
Put it for common things, right? What you talked about on the podcast might have been timely and timeless there, but you can take that and apply it to what's ever going on today too. So you're not limited by new content. You're limited by reusing the content that you already have. And I notice it in emails, right? Where it's like, oh, what do I write this week? And so, you talk about, well, just write about what you talked about.
Yeah. Just put it out there. And you can even do an email sequence like this. So that's another thing. So many people are excited about being on podcasts because they're getting a front row seat to another person's audience. That's half the benefit. And of course, I'm not trying to downplay that. That's very important. You also have your own audience, and to assume that the audience is going to tune in to an interview that you've had simply because they're your audience is naive. I'll put a capital N naive. I'll say that. That's why you have to kind of have that strategy behind it. And I think even just email nurturing is a really good way to do it. Include it in an intro, include it in replies. If you are someone who utilizes auto replies with emails, you'll send an email and you'll get that. Thank you for your email. We'll respond to you when we get a chance. Not very common, but a lot of people still do it. Put the interview in there. Well, hey, thank you for your email. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. While you wait, tune in to hear my insights with whoever on whatever and include that. I get so many email blasts from other people's podcasts and other people's things. And you would think that a lot of those would be auto deletes because it just tends to be noise in the inbox. No, I look at them, and depending on how they're presenting that podcast in the email, I may or may not listen. And if you're doing it in a way that is exciting and makes it seem like that's something I could really benefit from, of course I'm going to tune in. Because again, I'm already in your audience. I'm getting the email blast, but that doesn't mean I want to listen to this episode. But if you're making it approachable and adding context in a way and utilizing the audience you already have, you're just going to keep that audience longer and longer.
It made me think of something Tiffany, our marketing manager, does, right? The email signature blocks that we have for all of our emails that go out there. She's continually changing those, and it'll be focusing on a different subject, a different resource, a different podcast. And it's like, wow, if you're emailing all of your clients, responding to things, why not put it in there? Just because you did the interview a month ago doesn't mean it still can't help people today.
Oh, please, Tom. The number of people that we work with who are still including an interview they had 10 years ago on their one pager, it's overwhelming. And that's good. I don't mean to disparage anybody. I think if you had an impactful interview 10 years ago and the information is still relevant to somebody, absolutely you should use that. That helps build your credibility. It shows that you know what you're doing, especially if it's, I hate to use this, but if it's a better podcast, if it's someone that you've spoken to who has a level of notoriety, I don't care that it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, someone thought you were worth the time. So you've probably only gotten better since then. And I think that's also a really good one for repurposing, even just dropping that you were in an interview with somebody. Again, even 10 years later, that shows that you're competent. That shows that you know what you're talking about. That shows that someone saw something in you and gave you the opportunity to say what you had to say. And obviously it worked out because they still published it, right? Because that sometimes will happen too.
Yeah. And think about that. It's like when you go to somebody's page, if they were on Broadway 10 years ago, they're going to have that on there. If they did a TED Talk or a TEDx talk 2 years ago, it's going to be up there. And yet you go to so many people's page that have done media appearances and you'd never know it from their website.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, it's like I said earlier, I think a lot of clients have a hard time bragging on themselves because, first of all, I think if you're looking at it as bragging on yourself, you're probably going to have a hard time. That's not what you're doing. It can be. If you're the kind of person that's fine with bragging on yourself, by all means, boast, brag, go crazy. But it's just showing your credibility. And I think to not showcase the work that you've done is standing in your own way. And that's the last thing you want to do, especially if you're putting yourself out there in such a vulnerable thing as, podcast interview marketing. That takes courage.
The thing is that when you're on a podcast, you're not talking about yourself all the time, right? This is not your story. There's some podcasts that focus around that. But if all you're telling is your origin story on every podcast, it gets old really quick. And it's like doesn't resonate with the clients, right? It's interesting, but how does that help me? And it's, you can use those, media kits, your placements on the website there to really showcase different things. And I think of what I can't take credit for this, right? It's Tiffany that has built all of that. You go to the website and there's different case studies, right? So if you're a coach, look at these case studies. If you're a nonfiction author, look at these case studies. If you're a category designer, look at these. And then the same way on the different interviews. Right. So if you go there, there's an interview of, how nonfiction authors can use podcast interview marketing. And that's not something we produced. That's from Smith Publicity. That's like the big one for book publishing. And they had us on to talk about that, right? There's one about how you can use it in health and wellness, right? Chloe's on that one talking about it. So all of a sudden people go down in the interviews and it's not the same origin story every time. They can start clicking and saying, oh, that sounds like me. I'm going to listen to more of that.
Yep. Every approach is different. It's not one size fits all. The only thing that is one size fits all is, again, the strategy that you put behind it. And what works for you is not going to work for somebody else. But if you're working it at all, you're already doing better than those that just kind of sit back and wait for it to happen. Because it's not just going to happen. If someone has to be the one to say it, I'll say it. It's not just going to happen. You have to put some work into it.
Hope is not a strategy.
Not one we have. No, sir. Exactly.
So, you always talk about long form content. And so many times people think about, oh, we'll clip it up into, 60-second clips or 30-second, or we'll catch them for 15 seconds. It's like, well, maybe you start to go longer on that. So what's some ways that you can really use this content?
Like I said, blog posts, clips are definitely great for drumming up the excitement. I don't think that's what you should solely rely on, because again, there is a lot of power to what you're saying. And if you're just leaving it to clips alone, you're going to leave a lot of the important context out. So like I said earlier, one single sentence could become an entire blog post. It could be it doesn't even have to be as long as a blog post. If that's kind of daunting to you, even just a multi-paragraph LinkedIn post, again, those do really well there. That can turn into a whole thing and just get people excited on it. I would also say, if you've ever thought about venturing into authoring a book, starting with podcast interview marketing is a really good place to start, because I don't mean to disparage. I have found in this industry, people who are really good speakers and talkers aren't always really good at writing. Sometimes that tends to be a little harder. So I think there's a lot of benefit. One, get transcriptions for your interviews. I think there's nothing but opportunity for doing something like that. You will actually get to see it in front of you. You can see, you will get a visual representation of how much ing you're doing. That's just a little tip there. You don't really realize how many filler words you use until you see it written out in front of you. So do that. Look at the points throughout the interview that the host was particularly interested in that you were saying, kind of highlight those, see what you can turn into that. Because just like I said, a single sentence can become an entire blog post or a marketing campaign. It can also become a chapter in a book. One single point, one single note, that can become something you can really expand on. And if you have the time to make the long form content instead of just like a quick interview, which an interview is long form content, don't mean to say it's not, but you only have so many words and you only have so much time to fill with an interview. And you can really talk more about what you want to say in the longer forms, like the blog post or the book or something like that. That's just, again, context is a word I'm using a lot here that provides more context. It gives you more authority. It shows that you even more so know what you're talking about and have a bit of gravitas to actually say it to people. That's what's going to get you that thought leadership too. If that's a goal you're looking for, I would really recommend transcribing your interviews and turning that into something. Treat it as like a rough draft. This was my rough draft of my book. This is what I talked about. And now I know what I'm actually going to say when I make the actual product.
And it's interesting. There are companies out there that will do this for you. There are ghostwriters that will charge you tens of thousands of dollars. There's ghostwriters that will charge you a percentage plus six figures to come and sit down with you for 3 days and basically ask you questions. And if you think about it, on a podcast interview, most of us talk about 150 words a minute. So even if you talk on an interview 75% of a 45-minute interview, that's 5,000 words, right? Start to take 6 interviews. You've got 30,000 words of raw content there, which you've got to be careful of. Like we talked about before, don't give your origin story on all 6 podcasts, right? Use those topics to talk about different things. And if you can think through, here are the 12 chapters that I want in my book, you can work through those. And I think of while he didn't do it this way, he did his interviews this way. Jeff Madoff, who wrote a book called Creative Careers, when he came back, he's like, he didn't want to talk on a podcast interview about this generic book, right? He wanted to drill down on each one, and he could focus on one chapter, like the myth of the lone creative. And he'd dive deep into there. And then he could say, that's just one of the themes in the book. You can go back and find all of those in the book. So you could do it either way there. And it's such a powerful way. And like you said, so many people, I resonate with this. Writing is a chore, right? I've written a lot of blogs in my life. Every one of them's a homework assignment, but I can talk. So if you can create in the way you want and then repurpose it in the way that's best for other people too.
And what is an interview question if not a prompt, like a writing prompt? That's another way you could look at it too. Every question you're being asked is just another opportunity to talk more. And if the talking turns into writing, well, then you already have a framework for what you're trying to do there. Every interview, even if it's a horrible interview that never gets posted, that's a lesson in there somewhere, and you can still get something out of that. So again, strategy is really behind everything. Not an interview isn't something you just do. It's a move into what you're trying to do later.
It's like the interview we did previously with Marcus Sheridan. Marcus wrote a great book called They Ask You Answer, right? And that's what a podcast is. They're the host, the audience, they're asking the same questions and you just answer those. So as we're going through this, some people say, oh, you got to be on YouTube. Everything's got to be video. What's your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of benefit to it. I do want to make it clear again, dear listeners, YouTube is not primarily a podcast platform, but that doesn't mean that you can't utilize it to your best advantage. Again, Joe Rogan gets those 100 million views a lot of times because of the short clips. And also, if you typically frequent YouTube, I do. I spend a lot of time on YouTube. I love my YouTube. The reels get recommended to you a lot more frequently and a lot more fervently than the actual videos do. Like, they just as much as the actual long videos, the reels are the ones that they're really trying to get in front of you. And if it's just 45 seconds, why would you not utilize that? Because you can watch them while you're waiting for other things. You get that snippet in there. And anything you put on a YouTube reel could also be used on Instagram. It can be used on LinkedIn. It's not just YouTube is primarily a video platform, and that is why YouTube has become what it is. But that doesn't mean you can't take what you put on YouTube other places. So I do think there's a benefit to having a YouTube presence. I think you need to not put all of your stock into that. I think if you are posting your interviews on YouTube or snippets from them, definitely track that and see what kind of engagement you're getting. Don't put everything into that though, because it's not a podcasting platform. People are not going to YouTube to listen to podcasts. They're usually using their podcast app. So look at it realistically, but definitely use it to your advantage.
And some people are cutting the cable and using YouTube as television, right? And just looking for things to watch there. So we've talked about a lot of things here, but so many times people will say, well, I've got a content creation problem, right? If I could only create as much content as Gary Vaynerchuk. And I'm like, we all create the content. It's just capturing it, right? And, it's that idea of you've already got it. You already got the engine here. You just need to harness this. So any final words around, how to make sure that you don't run dry on content?
Yep. I say this every time. Podcasts are evergreen content. Unless you're in like a highly scientific field where something could change, what you said 10 years ago very likely is still relevant. And I think to not utilize that, again, leaving opportunity on the table, one sentence can become an entire marketing campaign. It can become a blog post. It can become a book, even just a chapter in a book among many other chapters. And I'm going back to my main point at the beginning. If you are only looking to appear on a podcast and then sit back and wait for the engagement to happen to you, you're already not firing on all cylinders. It's not going to happen to you. You don't look at it as a passive activity. It's active, it's intentional, it's strategic. It should be, because that's how you're going to get the best thing out of it. You could still be talking about one interview for 10 years, just like I said, a lot of people do. But if what you said mattered then, that doesn't mean it doesn't matter now. And it's silly not to keep making it matter to those around you who are willing to listen.
The one sentence that you said in this conversation that I wrote down and could go into an entire theme, right, is stop talking into the void, right? So many people are out there just talking. They don't know who the audience is. They don't know the data. They're not getting the feedback on the interview. Then they're not promoting it. But they realize that if they talk into the right void enough times, magic will happen. And I'm like, it's like, it may happen, but that's not a strategy. That's not something that's been proven. For me, I'd rather use the system, use the process so that I know when I talk, people will listen and it moves the needle.
And that's another thing, we say a lot here. If you can't break through the noise, join in on the conversation, start a new conversation. There's power in the words, whether you believe it or not. And it's just up to you to harness it and use it properly to get everything that you're hoping for.
Chloe, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your wisdom with us. This is the things we talk about. I know you talk about with your clients, and really it's not just about getting more interviews. It's getting more results from every interview.
Exactly. Thanks, Tom. I had a great time.
Wow. What an amazing conversation with Chloe today. I hope you're as inspired as I am by her insights and practical strategies for repurposing and maximizing your podcast interviews. Remember, repurposing, it's not an afterthought. It's a strategy that turns every interview into a gold mine of engagement and authority. So here's your action step for today. Look at your last podcast interview, or maybe the one you're planning for next, and map out exactly how you're going to start using it beyond the single appearance. Are you sharing it across all your social media? Are you pulling out those golden quotes and clips? Are you sending it out to your email newsletter, or even using it as the seed content for a blog post or a lead magnet? Don't let your hard work go to waste. Make it work for you over and over and over again. And if you're ready to take this to the next level and see how you can implement these strategies in your own business, check out all the resources we've got over at Interview Valet. Because remember, hope is not a strategy. Until next time, keep sharing your story, keep repurposing your interview, and keep growing your business with podcast interview marketing. Thanks for listening.